In the previous video, we explored various perspectives throughout the history of psychology. In this video, we now turn our attention to contemporary psychology. What are the kinds of questions that psychologists today are interested in? Before we get started, it's important to remember something pretty obvious. You are complex. You have a physical body, a conscious mind, and you engage in outwardly observable behavior. All of that is nested within your surrounding social and physical environment. We can refer to these as different levels of psychological functioning, and they can all interact and influence each other. For example, your neurotransmitters, which are part of your physical body, might be related to your mood, which is part of your conscious experience, which in turn might influence your behavior to some degree. However, research has also shown that it can work in the opposite direction too. Intentionally changing your conscious thoughts and outward behaviors can also shape your brain's physiological functioning as well. It's safe to say that looking at all of these variables at once would be pretty overwhelming. Therefore, psychologists today usually specialize at just one or two of these levels. As a result, contemporary psychology is a highly diverse field that encompasses many related, yet unique, specialty areas that each have their own emphasis. Let's look now at some of the main specialty areas or subdisciplines that psychologists today focus on, and that you might be interested in if you explore a career in psychology. First, biopsychology focuses on, you guessed it, how our biology influences our behavior. A biopsychologist is interested in topics such as sensory and motor systems, sleep, drug use and abuse, neurodevelopment, plasticity of the nervous system, and biological correlates of psychological disorders. For example, a biopsychologist might be interested in questions like which genes relate to particular outcomes, what are the functions of different brain regions, and what are the specific neural circuits involved in different mental disorders. As discussed in the previous video, cognitive psychology focuses on studying our cognitions, or thoughts, and their relationship to our experiences and our actions. Cognitive psychologists today are interested in a range of topics, including attention, problem-solving, creativity, language, and memory. For example, a cognitive psychologist might be interested in research questions like what kinds of study techniques are most effective for learning new material, how do factors like stress and sleep affect our ability to remember, and what kinds of cognitive biases might lead people to make poor decisions. Developmental psychology is the scientific study of human physical, cognitive, and social development across a lifespan. Developmental psychologists are interested in physical changes associated with aging, as well as changes in cognitive skills, moral reasoning, social behavior, and other psychological attributes. For example, Jean Twenge is a famous developmental psychologist who has studied how smartphone use and social media use have potentially impacted mental health in younger generations, such as Gen Z. Other research questions of interest to a developmental psychologist might include things like how does prenatal nutrition shape a child's future physical and cognitive outcomes? How does identity formation happen throughout adolescence? And how do cultural practices shape parenting behavior and expectations? Social psychology focuses on how we interact with and relate to others. In particular, social psychologists focus on how the situation we are in can influence our thoughts and behaviors. Social psychologists conduct research on a wide variety of topics, including attitudes, aggression, altruism, prejudice, attraction, and relationship dynamics. A social psychologist might be interested in questions like, what is the relationship between violent video game use and aggressive behavior? What factors might lead someone to be attracted to a potential romantic partner? How do we form attitudes and what leads us to be persuaded? And when are people most likely to behave in a helpful way towards others? Personality psychology focuses on patterns of thoughts and behaviors that make each individual unique. We've already talked a little bit about Freud, who contributed to some early theories of personality, although today most of his ideas are no longer supported. More recently, research in personality psychology has focused on identifying important personality traits, such as extroversion or agreeableness or self-esteem, accurately measuring those traits, and determining how these traits interact in a particular context to influence how a person might respond. A personality psychologist today might be interested in questions such as what kinds of personality traits best predict different life outcomes, like work performance, relationship longevity, or mental or physical health. Are personality traits relatively stable over time? And are personality traits primarily determined more by our nature, that is, our genes, or by our nurture, that is, our environment? Industrial organizational, or IO psychology, is a subdiscipline of psychology that applies psychological theories, principles, and research to the workplace. IO psychologists are often involved in issues related to personnel management, organizational structure, and overall work environment. For example, an IO psychologist might be interested in research questions like, what leadership styles predict the best organizational outcomes? Can AI be used to screen workplace applicants? And what kinds of organizational practices contribute to employee stress and burnout? Clinical and counseling psychology are closely related areas. Clinical psychology is generally more focused on the diagnosis and treatment of individuals with psychological disorders and other problematic patterns of behavior. For example, a clinical psychologist might be interested in questions like evaluating if a specific therapeutic technique is an effective treatment for schizophrenia, estimating the prevalence of depression in young adults, and exploring what factors might contribute to resilience, that is, being less likely to develop a mental disorder in the first place. Counseling psychology, in contrast, is typically more focused on helping otherwise psychologically healthy individuals explore important emotional, social, vocational, and health-related outcomes. Counseling psychology is typically more of an applied versus research-focused career, which is a distinction we'll explore more here in a minute. Lastly, as we discussed in the previous video, cross-cultural psychology is a relatively new specialty area that explores the similarities and differences in thinking and behavior between individuals from different cultural backgrounds. And here, culture doesn't include just nationality, but also things like differences in region within the same country or differences in other kinds of background variables like socioeconomic status. For example, a cross-cultural psychologist might be interested in topics like similarities and differences in how people from different nationalities experience and express emotion, how different value systems develop in different cultures and shape our decision-making, and how culture shapes a person's attitudes towards different topics like caring for one's elderly parents. Lastly, some psychologists might be interdisciplinary, that is, combining the methods or ideas from multiple different subdisciplines or perspectives. As you can probably see by now, many areas of psychology, while distinct, also have areas of overlap. For example, studying how genetics might play a role in the onset of a mental health disorder is relevant for both clinical and biopsychology. Studying the personality traits of effective leaders is relevant for both IO and personality psychology. And I also have a friend who studies how children acquire math skills, which is relevant for both developmental and cognitive psychology. In fact, while her degree is in cognitive psychology, her faculty appointment here is in the Human Development and Family Studies Department. So it's not uncommon for psychologists today to sit at the intersection of multiple subdisciplines, although they might more strongly identify with one area versus another. In the psychology department here at Virginia Tech, we have many talented faculty who are interested in some of the same questions that we just outlined. Specifically, our graduate program consists of 4 main concentration areas or specialties: cognitive neuroscience and biopsychology, clinical science, developmental science, and industrial organizational psychology. In the supplemental videos, you can also check out some short videos of our psychology faculty talking about their research. If you are a psychology major and are interested in joining a research lab at some point, this can be a great way to find one that aligns with your interests. On exams in this course, you will be primarily asked application-focused questions. That is, you'll need to apply concepts to a particular example, which is harder than simply memorizing definitions or looking up information in your notes. To help you practice, during these videos, I will occasionally pause for some application questions that mirror what you might see on an exam. Let's try our first application practice question now together. I'll pause the video for a minute to give you time to think, and you can also feel free to hit pause if you need more time. Please don't just fast forward to get the answer. This is designed to help you test yourself to see if you really understood the previous material. Based on the previous descriptions, what kind of psychologist is most likely to be interested in the following research question? Are people with a stronger social support network less likely to develop PTSD after experiencing a traumatic event? The answer is a clinical psychologist. Don't be fooled by the word development here. This just happens to be a word we use in English to describe the onset of a particular event. But this research question is not really about human development per se. It's more about what can trigger or prevent a mental health condition. So this question would be most relevant to a clinical psychologist. As an additional study strategy that you can try on your own, try looking up some actual psychology faculty, either here at Virginia Tech or at other institutions. Read their research interest descriptions, which you can usually find on their website or CV. And based on these descriptions, see if you can guess what subdiscipline of psychology they most identify with. While psychologists can be interested in different topic areas, they can also differ in whether their work is more experimental versus applied. A psychologist with a more experimental focus is primarily concerned with acquiring new scientific knowledge that broadens our theoretical understanding of certain topics. Although experimental psychologists may still do some occasional applied work, such as through consulting or community outreach, their primary focus is on conducting and publishing original research. Typically, someone wanting to pursue an experimental-focused career would need to obtain a PhD in his or her chosen concentration area. By contrast, a psychologist with a more applied career is less focused on conducting new research, but rather on applying knowledge already gathered to solve real-world problems. Typically, applied careers require less additional formal educational training, although many still require getting at least a master's degree. Some subdisciplines in psychology are inherently more applied than others. For example, clinical psychology applies psychological theories and principles to diagnose and treat mental health disorders, and IO psychology is focused on applying psychological concepts to the workplace. However, even within these subdisciplines, psychologists can still have a more experimental-focused career. For example, many clinical psychologists, especially those in faculty positions at universities, spend the majority of their time conducting new research that broadens our theoretical understanding of different mental disorders and the efficacy of their associated treatments. While they may still occasionally work with clients, it's not their primary focus. In contrast, as I previously hinted at, many counseling psychologists have a more applied career in that they spend the majority of their time working with clients while conducting very little, if any, original research. If you are a psychology major or considering becoming one, you might be wondering, what can you do with a psychology degree? In fact, there are many things you can do with a degree in psychology, although most career paths require some additional advanced training, such as getting a master's or doctorate degree. For example, psychologists might conduct research, teach, provide direct mental health services, work in industry, or any combination of the above. For more information on psychology-related careers, you can check out this free resource. You'll need to actually download the slides in order to access the hyperlink. You can also check out a Word document version of this resource posted on our Canvas page. In this video, we covered different contemporary subdisciplines in psychology. For the exam, you should be able to describe and distinguish between each subfield of psychology, identify research topics most relevant to each subfield, and describe the differences between experimental and applied psychology, and identify each in an example.